The recommended service inspections described here are based on approved service intervals and levels of related service being performed. If inspection indicates that additional servicing is required, refer to the Bendix ADB 22X service datasheet for details. Many service procedures are also demonstrated in other courses on air disc brake service. Although servicing is similar on all vehicle axles, be aware that brake accessibility will vary according to the application. When servicing a vehicle, always follow your shop's safety procedures, especially when it comes to securing, lifting, and supporting the vehicle. Regular inspection of a vehicle's air disc brakes is part of normal operating shop procedure and vehicle maintenance. Since the Bendix ADB 22X air disc brake is a floating caliper design, one of the most important inspections is to check that the caliper moves easily on the guide pins. This should be checked every time you work under the vehicle. To check for ease of movement, push and pull the caliper fully outward and inward. The movement should be slight but noticeable. You may also hear a clunk as the caliper moves and the disc pads contact the rotor. Next, verify that the adjuster cap and the guide pin covers are all securely in place. Another regular inspection of a vehicle's air disc brakes is to check the running clearance. This is done by pushing the caliper assembly inward while holding the inboard pad toward the rotor and checking the running clearance between the inner pad back plate and each tappet. The clearance should be within 24 and 43 thousandths of an inch. If it is not within these limits, your next step is to confirm whether the adjuster mechanism is functioning properly. If this inspection is required, first remove the inner brake pad assembly. For details on this procedure, refer to the course on brake pad change. Then remove the adjuster cap to expose the shear adapter and attach a 10mm boxed end wrench to the shear adapter. The wrench must have the clearance to turn freely, at least 180 degrees in a normal tightening fashion. Now apply the brake twice at approximately 30 psi and check to make sure the wrench rotates clockwise and then stops with each brake application. If it does not, then the caliper assembly must be replaced. The next inspection is to visually inspect the inner and outer brake pads for excessive wear. Check to see if either pad appears to be approaching the minimum lining thickness of 2 millimeters or 79 thousandths of an inch, approximately the thickness of a nickel, anywhere along its length. If that appears to be the case, an actual measurement of the pad's total thickness is required. Measure to make sure that each pad's total thickness, including the backplate, is not less than 11 millimeters. If either pad is less, then all brake pads on the axle should be replaced. Follow your shop practices and replace the pads if they will wear out before the next scheduled maintenance. As you inspect the brake pads, you may see minor damage at the edge of the pad material. This does not call for pad replacement as long as there is no major damage to the pad's surface and pad thickness measurements are within the acceptable limits just noted. Next, measure the rotor thickness and inspect the rotor surface. What follows is for Bendix rotors. In all other cases, follow the rotor or original equipment manufacturer's guidelines. Minimum rotor thickness is 1.457 inches and should be measured at several points. Check the rotor for signs of wear, damage, and heat cracks. Small heat cracks like these are allowable. However, a crack that reaches either side of the rotor is not acceptable, and the rotor must be replaced immediately. For details on the procedure, refer to your vehicle service guide. Cracks in rotors are acceptable only if the length of the crack is less than 75% of the width of the rotor contact area. No cracks that reach either edge are permitted. And as for the depth or width of any cracks on the rotor, For conventional Bendix rotors, radial cracks are acceptable if they are less than 1.5 millimeters deep or wide. In the case of Bendix spline disc rotors, cracks on the surface are acceptable if they are less than 1 millimeter deep or wide. Where a spline disc rotor is used, be sure to check the condition of the retention brackets and spacers that hold the rotor to the hub. The last service check covered in this course is to visually inspect the external seals for damage. These include parts like the adjuster cap, the seals on the large fixed and short floating guide pins, and the tappet boots. If any inspections result in need for replacement parts, referring to the brake assembly part number label will help you identify the proper service kit. The brake part number is shown on the top line. Here's what you need to remember about inspection procedures for the Bendix ADB 22X air disc brake. First, always follow your shop's safety procedures. Check the caliper for ease of movement. Check the running clearance, which should be within 0.6 to 1.1 millimeters. Visually inspect the inner and outer brake pads. Pad thickness, including the backplate, should be a minimum of 11 millimeters. Measure rotor thickness and inspect the rotor surface. Minimum rotor thickness is 37 millimeters. And finally, visually inspect external seals for damage. For optimum performance and service life, always use genuine approved service replacement parts on Bendix air disc brakes.